Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Great. Great. We look fantastic. Good job, guys. Hi, folks. Thanks for joining us today. So good afternoon. My name is Karen Goodenough. I'm Executive Director here at NASW Minnesota. And let's just take 1 second and do a sound check. Can some of you, if you hear us, can you chime in on the chat and tell us that you hear us? See anything on there, Rob?
And we see a blue outline when somebody chats.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you have sound on your computer right now, Shireen? Could you hear us?
I mean, it's muted, but yes.
Can you unmute it just so we can see if you can hear us? Oh, it might do weird things.
Yeah.
Did anybody say anything? Let's make sure we're
Or
not
does that
muted.
just mean it's on? Maybe that just means it's on. I can go outside.
Yeah, do that. Hi, folks. Hang in there while we deal with our technical difficulties here. And no one's responding yet.
Yeah, that must just mean we're on.
Sounds fine.
Sounds fine?
Okay.
Okay, great.
People are awake.
All right, folks, we're going to get started. So again, my name is Karen Goodenough. I'm Executive Director here at NASW Minnesota. And welcome to our webinar. This is our 2019 Proposed Social Work License Fee Increase, a conversation between NASW Minnesota and the Board of Social Work in Minnesota. So first, I'd like the folks around the table to just introduce themselves quickly. Why don't we start over here with Angie?
Okay. My name is Angie Hirsch, and I'm an LICSW, and I'm the current board chair of the Minnesota Board of Social Work.
And I'm Kate Zackerpate. I'm the board's executive director and an LSW.
Great.
And Rob Edwards, I'm the current chair of NASW Minnesota and LGSW.
Great. And I'm also an MSW and an LGSW. So lots of social workers around the table here today. So here's our plan for our 1-hour session today. First, I'll share some brief background on why we're here today. Then I'll ask Kate a bunch of questions to help us all understand the issues that we're facing. Then we'll open it up for conversation to the group for some Q&A. So please, if you would just hold your questions until that time, as we likely will answer many of them as we go along. And I also want to thank all of those who sent in some questions and thoughts and considerations ahead of time. And so I've incorporated those into the conversation today as well. So, however, I just also want to say if you do have a quick clarifying question while we're going through something in particular, if you want to go ahead and chime in on the chat, and our board president, Rob Edwards, will bring those to our attention. All right. So, and lastly, we are recording the session. So if there's something we said that you missed taking notes on and you want to come back to it, you can later. We will both try to get this on our website. We'll have it available if you want to email either of our offices also. And for those who weren't able to make it today, we're making it available to them. So as you may remember, the issue of raising social work licensure fees was hotly contested by NASW Minnesota during the last 2018 legislative session. Our members at that time strongly opposed a significant increase and were not aware of why such an increase was needed. And I should say generally they were not aware. Some people knew very clearly what was happening. Some people definitely supported the board in getting the resources that they needed to do their work. And others said, why so much so quickly? Can we do this in a more incremental way? Lots of things. And so we'll talk more about that as we go. But at that time, we were successful last legislative session in reducing the proposed increase by half. So the bill was then later vetoed by the governor. So it was included in the omnibus bill last year at about half the rates that what you saw in the information that went out and what we'll talk about today. But it was vetoed in that omnibus bill by the governor. So the Board of Social Work has again requested additional resources to support and enhance their operations. And Governor Walz this year has included these increases in his biennial budget. So in hosting this forum, I want to make sure everyone understands that NASW Minnesota is in no way saying that we support the fee increase. We're also not saying that we oppose the fee increase. We strongly support licensure for social workers, and we support the board and their role in protection of the public. We believe in the importance of having a strong social work board that is responsive to our needs as social workers in a timely and professional way. And we also support reasonable licensure fees. So that's where we come down today, is where do we stand as social workers on what is reasonable at this time and place. Our goal for today was to provide a way for busy social workers across the state to get up to speed on the licensure fee increase that's been looming now for several years, actually, and help our chapter decide what stance to take on the legislation for this year. To that end, our board has decided to hold off on deciding our stance until at least tomorrow. So after our members have had a chance to read the materials that I've been sending out from the board, and then hear the discussion and some of the issues that are at play. And then tomorrow I will be sending a survey out to all of our NASW members through email, asking them to weigh in on our stance. So members who are listening today, if you would look for that in your email and make sure to weigh in and let us know your thoughts, and then our board will reconsider where we move with the legislation this year. So before I begin, I want to say that since last year, since the time we worked on the legislation, the board has been very receptive to our recommendations that the board be more transparent and directly inform social workers about what the board is doing. So it was our understanding basically that social workers across the state, while there's a website available from the Board of Social Work with tons and tons of great information, the people are busy and they don't have time to dig through the website and read board minutes and get up to speed on all of the things that are looming and changing for us. So we asked the board, since they have direct access to all of us as social workers, to bring that content directly to us in some way. And they've started their, what do you call it, the docs?
Gov delivery.
Gov delivery. So an e-service where you can sign up. If you just go to the Board of Social Work online, you can sign up with your email and get those quarterly. You're sending those out?
Quarterly newsletters, but we are actually pushing out information as soon as we need to.
Sure.
But the key is that licensees and the public need to go to the website, and it is a subscription-based service. So the only way you're going to be connected is if you sign up, which is very easy to do at our website.
So even if you're licensed and you're already in their system, that does not mean you're automatically going to get those emails.
Correct.
You have to sign up to receive them. So go ahead and do that. So they've done a really good job of also responding to our requests for more information in a very succinct sort of way. So what started with lots of many page reports has been whittled down to, maybe a 1 or 2 page fact sheet so that all of us busy social workers can look at that and use it. And yeah. So, I also want to say up front that we at this table all come to this conversation from 2 very different perspectives, that we have 2 different missions in our organization. So the Board of Social Work is here to protect the public. They're a government agency and they're fully funded by our licensure fees. NASW, on the other hand, is here to support, equip, and inspire social workers. And we are the largest membership association of social workers in Minnesota with about 1,800 members and growing, and we see it as our place in the conversation to really speak on behalf of the social work community and help make change when change is necessary also. So we also have some shared goals, though. We all want social workers to be competent. We want to serve the public in the best way possible. And we all want a Board of Social Work that's responsive to our questions and public concerns in a timely and professional way. So let's get down to the nitty gritty here. We're going to talk turkey for a minute. We did send out, with the invitation, there was a link to a 2-page document that discusses the fee increases. One of the things that I've talked with Kate about is the concern that when they're talking about the fee increases on a monthly basis, it helps our brains understand that, when we think about it over the course of 2 years, since we pay our licensure fees every 2 years, it's only a $1, $2, $3 increase each month. However, none of us pay our licensure fees every month, and we have to pay them in one lump sum. And so that's how I want you all to also hear this today. And so I just ran the numbers real quick, and the legislation, the way it's currently presented, is listing our fee increases as a not to exceed level. And so I'm just going to run through the numbers really fast, and we will also, in the follow-up email that I send with a copy of this, I'll include this also in a written form for you. But LSWs, their current fees are $81 every 2 years. The not to exceed would be $115, which is a 42% increase. LGSWs would be the current fees are $144. They would go up to $210, which is a 46% increase. LISWs are currently at $216. They would go up to $305, which is a 41% increase. And LICSWs are currently $238.50, and it would go up to $335, which is a 41% increase. So last year, now I want to make sure everyone understands that what they're talking about in the legislation is a not to exceed level, which means the way the legislature likes to set these is this not to exceed threshold that the board then has the authority to move within. So they can raise and lower fees basically as often as they want, but we'll talk about that. That's hard to do in a quick manner, but they can raise and lower fees within that not to exceed as needed for their expenses. So last year, the proposed increase, so where they were going to actually raise our fees to within that not to exceed, was slated to be about 30%. Okay. So, but now we're a year later, and in light of another year with no increase, they're now proposing, their board has approved an increase to about 36%. So we won't feel, even if this goes through the way that it's slated right now, those 41 to 46% increases, we would only feel an increase of about 36% in this initial year when they would be implemented to start with. That's their intention at this point.
Correct.
Okay. So the other couple things, and then I will start asking questions, is that the bill language that is proposed right now is exactly the same as it was the last 2 years, with the same not to exceeds that we just talked about, and the actuals as I discussed. And one other thing that we've asked them to do is, and we'll talk later about some of the other kind of other ways that we could sort of play with the implementation and its effect on social workers, is to ask them to wait until fall, like September or October, for implementation. So we know that if whatever bill goes through, it will be in effect starting July 1.
Correct.
And we're asking that for the sake of our new grads, for our BSW and MSW programs across the state, that the implementation not happen until September or October, so they don't feel that in this first year of implementation. So that's something that we've asked the board to do already. So before I start, do you have any thoughts, comments on the things I just said?
I guess what I would offer, Karen's summary is in fact accurate. And what I really want to stress on behalf of the board is that at this point in time, and we'll talk a lot about it, the need to increase fees is absolutely critical. I mean, the board is at a tipping point in terms of being able to sustain. I've got data to share on that. And I think the other most important thing to be very clear about is that the board has absolutely no intention of implementing fees at that full not to exceed amount. That has never been the intention. And I think the beauty of a not to exceed fee model and structure in statute is that it gives the board the ability and some flexibility, as Karen said, to adjust fees as needed based on fiscal need, and quite frankly, also to hear the concerns of our stakeholders. I mean, the board is very receptive to hearing feedback, to having the conversations, to be presented with ideas and suggestions. I can't guarantee that all of those can be implemented immediately, but the board is open to feedback.
Great. And part of the reason why I wanted to invite Kate and Angie to come here today was because I hear a lot from social workers across the state that feel like the Board of Social Work is this big, bad, scary, like Oz kind of place. I tell Kate that, and she's very surprised by that. But when we all submit our paperwork and we go through the process, and it feels a bit scary, you feel like someone could say no to you, that someone could not give you a license, that you have a lot of power. And if they don't know you as people and know how receptive the board is, and how, a lot of the board meetings are public and we could all be present, but we are all busy. Right. And so our members at NASW, they empower us to, and the leadership here, to attend those meetings on their behalf and weigh in when necessary and that sort of thing. So we are there and present and having communication in lots of different ways. But our social workers across the state don't always get to see you both unless they have time for that. So. All right, so historically, folks, licensure began in Minnesota in 1987, and I want to make sure we remember that social workers worked really hard to get licensure in the first place. Not every state in the nation has licensure, and not many have licensure to the extent that we do, where almost every social worker in Minnesota now is required to be licensed. And it does a lot for our professional sort of place in the world, and especially in our state, to have licensure. Licensure then took full effect in '89, and I'd like Kate to just give people a little quick summary, very quick, on how fees have changed over that period. So since that '87, '89 till now.
Right. And, I in preparation for today, I looked at the detail, and I actually had a bit of a eureka moment that I would like to share. In terms of the fees were implemented in 1988. They were increased in 93, increased in 2000, then decreased in 2006, and again in 2009. And as I was looking at the data today in preparation, the current rates that we have now in 2000, and this is that we have in 2019, based on the 2009 reduction, are almost dollar per dollar equal to the rates in 1993.
Okay.
So again, I in my own mind have been saying, we haven't increased since 2000, even with the proposed actual fee amounts that the board is moving forward at this point. My place marker had been that fees would still be less than they were in 2000. Current fees are actually within $1 to $7 more than 1993. So to date, fees have been increased only twice and decreased actually twice. And I mean, with that, I just really want to, I feel like I need to call out that is because the board has been managing the business of the organization very fiscally responsible. And we have been, I think, very sensitive to the issues and the concerns that stakeholders, applicants, and licensees have brought forward. So if you look at the big picture, to date, there hasn't been a big change.
So fees have gone up and down a little bit. They went up, they went down. They haven't gone up again since they went down quite a few years ago. But it's my understanding that that is the way the legislature likes it to be. So the assumption is that if we do end up with a not to exceed at whether it's 20%, 40%, whatever it is, that we wouldn't then see another not to exceed increase for a significant amount of time. And that is the way the licensure likes to do this. The legislature likes to do this for all licensing boards. So it's nothing different for us compared to how it works with other licensing boards.
And that is correct, Karen. Again, when you think of the time, the resources necessary to bring legislation forward, it's not a small investment of resources. And so that generally has been sort of the cycle for fees.
Okay, great. So we know that it's a timely need. The board is saying that it's a critical need at this point for them to increase fees so that they have more money to manage the operations. We'll talk about what the details of that are, but I want to just run through a little quick summary of what happened over the last 2 years, because this has been sort of a work in progress for a couple of years that you thought was sort of a done deal a couple of years ago and then wasn't. So in 2017, this fee increase was included in the biennial budget that the board submitted to Governor Dayton and was approved by Governor Dayton. It went to the legislature in 2017 and passed, but there was a technical error in the drafting of the final bill, and in special session, it was mistakenly omitted from the omnibus bill. So in March of 2018, last legislative session, based on their pledge to correct that error, the legislators who had worked on it the previous year introduced the bill to correct the error. So last year, when it came to the legislature, it was a surprise to Kate and the Board of Social Work. It was absolutely a surprise to us. But part of that was I was new at NASW. a year ago, and some of our board members were new and that sort of thing. And so the conversation that had happened with NASW, the Coalition of Licensed Social Workers, and the other social work groups and whatnot had happened actually several years prior, before they had submitted that biennial budget to the governor back prior to 2017. And so this has been years where social workers at that time said, okay, we get it. It's expensive. We don't really want to pay it, but we get that you need more money. That was sort of the general consensus that I got from the leadership that I talked to from that time. But that since then, so in 2018, my natural inclination and our current boards is to spend more energy now talking with our members and being very transparent with our members and making sure our members have feedback into whatever decisions that we're making. And so I sent out a message to our members, and within a few days heard from over 500 who weighed in and said, no, it's too much, too fast. They don't care that it had already gone through in 2017. We should fight it. And so after that sort of due diligence and hearing back from our members, we decided to fight that bill and got that 20% decrease, or that 50% decrease from what the not to exceeds had been slated at. Since that time, I have to say that our relationship with the Board of Social Work has grown, is stronger. And I do, as I said before, believe that they're doing a better job of communicating with all of us directly, and having us all here today is a good testament to that too. So now if we turn to 2019, the Board of Social Work sent a budget draft to the governor's office. The increase was included in the governor's budget. So Kate, if you would describe for us in the quickest way you can, because this is very complicated, the budget and legislative process that you have to go to set your budget for the board, and how this fee increase has to work through the legislative process.
Okay. Because we are a state agency, all state agencies operate with what is called a biennial budget model, which means that all state agencies create their agency budgets over a 2-year period. Within Board of Social Work and all agencies, we follow the instructions from the governor's office, Mninnesota Management and Budget, and we do an incredible analysis of all of our expenditures, our revenues. We do projections. We do a lot of number crunching. We put together a proposal. We bring it forward to our finance committee and then to the full board for consideration and approval. Then we submit it to Mninnesota Management and Budget. It gets rolled up to the governor's office. And again, how state agency biennial budgets work is that you never know until the governor releases his or her budget if they are going to include what you requested. This year, the board was fortunate, and in the governor's budget, there are 3 change items, that's what it's called, where we requested to do special projects, in addition to just requested some additional funding to basically maintain some of our core expenditures like non-discretionary technology expenses, staffing expenses, just the core to keep us operating. So all of that was included in the governor's budget. Things then move through the legislative process. And typically what happens is that each body, the House and the Senate, puts together their own Health and Human Services budget bill. All of the health licensing boards fall under Health and Human Services division and those committees. And then at this point in time, there is a bill in the House and in the Senate, and those are moving, a little slowly. The House bill actually will have its first hearing this Thursday, and we'll see how that goes. In these budget bills, they are over 600 pages in length, and they are chocked full of all state agency budgets, appropriations, special programming. There's policy in them. They're essentially sort of mini omnibus bills. And then what ends up happening typically, particularly in an environment where you have one body with majority controlled by Democrats and a body where a majority is controlled by Republicans, and then you place a Democratic governor in the mix. With budget bills, you can almost guarantee that they will end up being sent to a conference committee. And it's during the conference committee at the very end of session, typically 5 days or so, where that's the time where everybody sort of rolls up their sleeves, puts on their big negotiating hats, and the outcome has to be two budget bills that are identically aligned. And then you sort of see what comes out of that. I mean, so that's kind of how we approach budgeting and what happens in
That's great.
in legislative process.
Thanks, Kate. I know that's a review for some of you, and some of you who don't do this legislative work every day. It's nice to kind of hear the reminders on how that process works. So we know there are two bills currently moving through the legislature, and I'll draw your attention to the numbers on those and things at the end of our session today.
Great.
So Kate, I want us to talk briefly about why an increase is needed at this time and what you're planning to do with it. So you stated in your materials that additional revenues are needed to do things like maintain current business operations and services, that your costs of doing business have gone up in every area, but your revenue has not gone up. And I know we've also talked about this notion that we know that the number of social workers in Minnesota has grown exponentially. So it's grown 59% in less than 10 years. And so some folks are saying, well, if the number of social workers have grown, why don't you just have more money then to spend? And so that is a hard thing for our brains to understand.
Right.
So if you could talk a little bit about what some of those costs are that have gone up and why it is that just bringing in more social workers doesn't mean you have lots of money to spend.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. And again, I will see if I can explain this as clearly as possible. A couple of things at play with the board's budget. We have expenditures that come out of what is called direct operations, and think of that as sort of it's your foundational expenses, your bare bones, it's your structure. That's IT, staffing, rent, reimbursement for board member per diems. It's the nuts and bolts. In addition, we have what are known as indirect expenditures, and those are expenditures that we pay out to other state agencies that provide service. So sort of keep that in mind if you can. Again, going back to the legislative process, when the legislature and the governor ultimately approves a budget, it is known as an appropriation. And that appropriation literally sets a cap on any agency's spending authority. When I talk about this, I think of that as being sort of the board's checkbook to take care of rent, staffing, IT, those kinds of expenditures, keeping the lights on, quite frankly. And then there are the indirect expenditures. Now those are pretty key. Attorney generals, other state agencies, health professional services program. Those expenditures don't come out of the checkbook. Those expenditures come out of our reserve. So it's sort of like we have a checkbook and a savings account. It's sort of how I talk about it most often. And ultimately, though, at the end of the day, we have to be able to collect adequate revenue to pay for both. Right now, our overall agency budget, the money that we're putting out to provide our core public safety services and provide good services to all of our stakeholders, is running about $1.7 million a year. The indirect expenditures, those alone are almost $400,000. And again, when I was preparing for this conversation today and really doing the analysis of what's really happened with expenditures, what business expenses really have gone up, one kind of a high-level observation, even though we were maybe bringing in 59% additional revenue, so to speak, with the growth of licensees, our operational expenditures over the last, 6 years or so have increased by 100%. So even if you're bringing in 50% more money, if your expenses are 100% more, you're still not going to have extra money. So that is very important, and I can give specifics in a moment. Another thing too, in terms of that reserve, it was back between 2004, 2008 to 2012. The Board of Social Work had a significant reserve because we had increased fees in 2000. We determined we were over collecting. And so the board intentionally then put those two decreases in place to reduce that reserve. We are still in that business model with the reductions. So even though we're bringing in some more revenue, the overall business strategy is to continue to reduce the reserve. And we had the perfect storm between 2008 and 12, where the legislature transferred $1.4 million from the board's reserve. If that money were still in the reserves, we'd probably not be needing to have this conversation today. And so on the face of it, even though it appears that more revenue is coming in, because of the transfer of reserves, 100% increase in expenditures, and having to pay for all those the indirect funds rather, we're still moving towards a deficit budget. So a couple of specifics I can mention as I was doing my prep for today. Our IT expenditures, this is technology, which, is at this point in time, this is non-discretionary. I mean, technology expenditures are as necessary as having a roof. So those have now gone up to, this is an annual ongoing IT expense. It is running $100,000 at least per year. So if you're looking at an appropriation of $1.2 million, that's a significant piece of that overall budget. And this is since 2017, when the state moved towards centralized IT services. So again, relatively new, huge impact. Our Attorney General budget, which again is core, non-discretionary, the law requires for all of our complaint resolution, our legal counsel and investigation must be conducted exclusively by the Attorney General's office. We have to pay for that. Our Attorney General budget has gone up from $97,000 in 2013 to running a little more than $200,000 a year. And our Health Professional Services budget, HPSP, which again, I don't think many licensees are completely aware of HPSP. It is an excellent service. They are the state, essentially a diversion program for licensees who are dealing with possible impairments. And the board pays the money for licensees to be enrolled in that program. That has increased just since 2013 from $17,000 a year to over $36,000 a year. So these are, in my mind, some of the really core expenditures that go to the heart of our mission, the heart of serving licensees and the public. And quite frankly, it's been 100% increase. Karen and I discussed again in preparation, in terms of the Attorney General investigations, we have estimated each investigation is running about $10,000. And again, ran some stats. And in 2018, we had 24 Attorney General investigations, many of which are mandated by law to occur at the Attorney General's office. And in 2019, which this is amazing data, we are only at the first quarter, the end of March. We already have 18 investigations at the Attorney General's office. And so again, I think these are good examples that the nature of the services we are mandated to provide, the nature of the expenditures, it's the cost of doing business continues to rise. And we cannot maintain adequate delivery of services with the current state of revenues that are coming in.
Mm-hmm.
You know, another, I think, a fact that a lot of applicants and licensees and the general public aren't aware of, fees are the board's only source of revenue. We get no general fund dollars, no tax dollars, like most other state agencies. And so that's what we are dependent on in terms of being able to function and function well.
Okay. Thanks, Kate. And I think we'll circle back to a couple of those important points as we go here. But I think one of the things that's clear to me is that this notion of protecting the public, which is the core service of the board, it's what they're here to do. That expense in itself, that notion of sort of resolving complaints against social workers, has gone up exponentially. Part of that has to do likely with the fact that the number of social workers has gone up exponentially.
Certainly.
So if we go up by 59%, obviously the number of complaints are going to go up also. But we also know that there are things in our practice and our expectations of our agencies and things that may sort of stretch social workers beyond what they are trained to do, beyond their skill set. And then ethical considerations come in there too. And so one of the things, just a side note, is because of this issue, because they are seeing in Minnesota so many issues with complaints against social workers, and then ethical just concerns by our social workers and how to practice ethically in the constraints of the organizations and the expectations and the low staffing levels and all of these, high caseloads and all of these things. NASW is hosting for our pre-conference day at our annual conference this year, a session where assurance services, our liability insurance provider, is going to do a half day on liability and protecting ourselves and our practice. And then the board is going to come and really talk about, what are people getting in trouble for?
That's right.
What are these complaints about? What is it that we can do to protect ourselves from those? And I'm telling you guys, I get calls from members every week saying, I'm afraid a client's going to call on me. Should I be worried about this? What should I do? What's going to happen? That sort of thing. And so this is at sort of, it's at the table right now. And it's something that social workers need to be paying attention to. And it's a service we don't want to have to pay for. We basically, what you're saying is, your checkbook comes from us, and this is what we're paying for, is dealing with complaints against us also. And so those are things we can also contribute to working on in a different way also. Try to lower that. We can't control how much the Attorney General charges for those fees. And I appreciate you doing that sort of quick summary about how the money comes in and where it goes and that sort of thing. I think it's still hard for people to really wrap their brains around, but we're going to keep moving. One complaint that I hear a lot, and again, we're still talking about sort of what's going to change. So we raise fees. What are we going to see as social workers? What's going to change? So a complaint I hear a lot is that it sometimes can take a while before people get their applications and their supervision plans and verifications back. Will the proposed fee increase speed up those timelines?
This one is a challenge, and I appreciate hearing that feedback. I guess what I would offer, of course, and I really do mean this genuinely, that the board is really committed to providing excellent customer service and the best customer service that we can. At this point in time, our staff has really remained static for over a decade or more, even with, as Karen's been talking about, the increase in the number of licensees. And so again, our resources have been very limited while we've got an increase in the services we need to provide. With that said, we are always looking for greater efficiencies. We have really put, I think, a considerable amount of time and priority and investment into online services. Again, I think with a direct benefit for licensees and applicants. Renewals are now approved online immediately. For the first time ever, you can submit supervision type forms online. You can check the status of your application. You know, at the end of the day, would I like to see our response time improved? Certainly. At this point in time, we are at about a 45-day period for applications, and supervision verification forms have been a bit backlogged. I mean, I will acknowledge that. And again, I think a lot of this is that I don't have as many resources as I think are really necessary to deliver the standard of customer service that I would like to. This budget proposal does not include a request for additional staffing. I mean, quite frankly, given the opposition that we had last year in terms of the fee increase, it felt risky in this new budget planning that if that sentiment or opposition was going to continue, there weren't going to be enough revenues to hire additional staffing. My hope would be that that all of you listening today would see the value and the beauty of this current not to exceed proposal. Put a little trust in the board to be reasonable with the actual fees amounts that they set. And I am hoping that at the end of the day, there would be some additional revenues whereby over the course of maybe the next couple of years or in the next budget request, that we could request additional staff. You know, when you think of having to serve over 15,000 licensees with a full staff of 12.6, and I'm not on the phone every day talking to licensees and applicants, that is a high level of phone calls, of emails that we are responding to. We have sort of by necessity taken kind of a philosophy that we try to redirect people back to our websites for information. You know, it's if we spent 30 minutes on each phone call or email that came into the office, there would be no time to review applications. Mm-hmm. And so again, excuse me, as the director, I feel like I am kind of doing some juggling, needing to prioritize, and we are stretched thin. We are always looking for ways to improve our effectiveness, our turnaround time, and our efficiencies.
Yeah, and I think one of the concerns that comes up a lot, especially for new graduates and the faculty of our social work programs, is that for newly graduating folks, that's where the time comes in. So they're anxious to get out and get working and take their exam and have their license ready to roll. And they're the ones who are feeling this 30 to 60 day, 45 day, whatever it's running at that moment, but that lag time in there. And so while we realize the number of staff is low and clearly it takes some time and energy to process through each one of those. Right. It would be amazing if that process could also go to more of an online process so that there were more clicks to be done instead of paper to be, mail to be opened and dealt with. We know all of that takes time. And I know I've heard the board talk about those kinds of efficiencies that you'd love to make in the years to come. But at this point, this is sort of where we're dealing with it. What we want to make sure is that the board hears us clearly, that that's a concern. That I was just talking with a group of MSWs this week, and they're like, how long am I supposed to wait? I've sent my stuff in. I've been sitting there waiting. They're not sure. So and they read the stuff online, but it's daunting. There's a lot of rules and regulations, and they don't want to screw up and lose their chance of getting a license or, those sorts of things. And so we want to make sure that those things are happening, and that maybe if there is a lag time of a certain amount running, to say that right up front and make sure they know, like, you probably won't hear back from us for 30 to 60 days, and don't be worried.
Right. And Karen, if I could respond to that. Those are the kinds of operational things that we do pay attention to. I mean, staff is monitoring. We are monitoring the processing time. How much time does it take to respond? If we are finding that we are getting backlogged because we get about 2,000 new applications every year and we've got one full-time coordinator, as needed, I really do think that, again, will this satisfy everybody? Probably not. but we do try to be responsive. I pull staff in from other areas to then address that volume. We have put information on the emails. We've put information on the voicemails. And, just a couple of other things as well in terms of applications. A lot, quite frankly, a fair amount of the time really depends on how quickly an applicant completes step 1, 2, 3.
And if they're thorough and
That's right.
that sort of thing. So.
And, we are now doing the fingerprint background checks, which takes a little bit of time at the BCA, which we can't control. But again, if applicants do that immediately when they're notified, rather than waiting and waiting, I mean, again, we can't move to the end until all the pieces are in place. And again, these are the kinds of things that we talk about so clearly when we do our presentations to every academic program in the state. And we have been creating fact sheets for students. We've got a new page at the website. I mean, we hear those concerns and we continue to address them in sort of whatever way we can, but we are trying very hard to be proactive, push information out to folks.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
Great.
I hear it.
Yeah. All right. So we have one more area of sort of what's going to happen with the money if the increase goes through the way it is this year. And then I want to move on to some other things that people are asking us to consider and asking you to consider. So one is that last thing is this notion of building reserves. So
yes.
It is required by state law that the board have adequate funds to avoid deficit spending, that you have to build your reserves. You'd be in violation of state law if you didn't. You're actually supposed to have a whole year's worth of expenses in reserves, which would be that $1 million. Yep,
1.2.
Which for all of you who run nonprofits, wouldn't it be amazing if we all had a whole year of expenses in our reserves, Rob? Wouldn't that be great? We know the reality is not that, but that's what our state law is currently set at for our board. So I want to reiterate the concern that people have had that we talked about briefly, which is that notion that in a few years' time, between 2004 and 2012, the legislature transferred $1.4 million from the board's balance in the special reserve fund, basically their savings account or reserves, into the state general fund. The laws have been changed since that time so that they can't do that again. Now, could they change the law and do that once we put $1 million in there? Of course, but we'll deal with that when that comes. But at the time, at this time, right now, as the law states, it was fixed so that the lawmakers cannot do that again. They can't take from our savings account because it's our savings account. We, as social workers, put that there to help fund the board, and it shouldn't be used for any other purposes, just like you can't take money from other places to fund board operations. So I wanted to just reiterate that is a concern.
Yes.
You know that. We know that. We've talked about it lots of times. The legislature did deal with that, and so that's where that is. We now have to pay ourselves back. So last year, based on our survey of over 500 of our NASW members, like I said, we had a few options that social workers would love for the board to consider along the way. So one of those that I know you've said, Kate, is just not a possibility is that people would love to see more incremental increases, more like a 2% cost of living, smaller increases over the course of time. None of our paychecks go up 40% any one year. Our new folks going out into the field don't make a lot more than they did, or that sort of thing. And in their first few years of practice, won't see those substantial sorts of changes. So talk to us like super briefly on why we can't do a 2% increase.
Yeah, and I understand the cost of living, certainly. I think that's kind of a business model. I did the math. I crunched those numbers, and a 2% increase is an additional increase in revenue of $25,000 a year. When I'm needing to operate to pay out $1.7 million in expenses every year, $25,000 is just not going to address that need. And Karen mentioned the reserves a little bit. Again, it was as big, it was over 1.4 million, which quite frankly, I think was a little risky to have that much money in a state account, and that was shifted from us. But at this point in time, that reserve is down to $340,000. This was as of June 30 of 18. We have had, we talked briefly about complaint resolution. It was 2 or 3 years ago, we had one case that cost over $50,000 in legal expenses. And it was a case that had to be dealt with, and it was highly contested. So again, and that's the pot of money that the legal attorney general fees come from. So with that said, we are now probably, well, as of June 30 of 18, we were at 340,000. We are projected to be in the red in deficit spending as of June 30, 2019 of over $100,000. State agencies cannot be in the red. And so again, it really, I think, does seem reasonable, at least from a business management perspective. And believe me, the board recognizes who likes to see their expenses increased. I mean, we don't, you don't, we get that. We understand. And again, with where we are proposing the actual fees to be, it is still lower than they were in the year 2000, which I think is a pretty dramatic fact, that knowing that even over the course of the last 19, 20 years, business costs have escalated so much. And I really believe it's because the board has been fiscally responsible, that even though it seems like a significant increase, at the end of the day, when you look at our fees, which are really quite a bit lower than most health licensing board fees, even though it seems significant, and I understand that, given that that puts us still lower than the year 2000, I think it's an important fact.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So based on some of the other feedback that we got from folks, and just in the essence of time here, I'm going to run through a few of the suggestions that people have come across, and especially the ones that haven't been shot down yet. And so we're hoping might still have some potential here. So one would be that I've started out with today, which is not implementing the increase until maybe September, October into the fall of 2019. So whatever increase there is, holding off on implementation. Another thing that people would love to see are lower fees for first-time licenses at each licensure level. So especially at the BSW, so at the LSW level and the LGSW, so those new grads coming out of school, it would be ideal if they could see a lower fee in that first round of licensure, because they're also paying other application fees. They're paying to take their exam. Some are taking test prep in order to prepare for their exam. I mean, it is an expensive time for them, not to mention, you know, they're not getting financial aid any longer. They're looking for jobs. Many of them are not fully employed yet, but they have to come up with the fees first. Right. And I hear from social workers all the time who are holding off on applying, doing their initial application and their application to take the exam because they simply don't have the money in their pocket to pay those fees, and they can't get a job without them. So it's really a tricky spot. So we'd ask that there be some consideration to either keeping the fees where they are for current grads or having a much smaller increase for those folks, and then 2 years in, them seeing the larger increase that other social workers are feeling. So we know that the profession is expected to grow in the coming years. So by 16% or more actually in the next 7 years. And so we know that if and when the fees are increased, they will replenish the reserves. And once the reserves are built up, it would be our hope and desire that fees be lowered again, that fees continue to only meet the need of sort of what the board has, instead of you continuing to just add service or whatever new ideas come across that, you know, have great service for folks, have the core practices down, and then lower fees for folks so that we can all do our business. Okay. And then, there are lots of other ways that the board could potentially advocate for social workers in practice. And I know from having lots of conversations sitting in your board meetings, the advisory committee, the legislative and rules committee, I know that, it's simply not the board's role to look out for social workers, to, help us grow, to help the profession grow, to speak on behalf of the profession. Like, that's not your role. But there are some things that we could in the Legislative and Rules Committee, and I know Angie sits on that with me as well, is do things like setting and establishing a best practice caseload for social workers that would help social workers in their practices to be able to do ethical practice and to stay within their scope of practice without being stretched so far. So do things that support the profession and maybe aren't, you don't have to go out and then talk about it with folks. I can do that, but I'd ask you to set some standards that are reasonable for social workers so that we can do our jobs the best we can. And so based on the feedback that you hear from hearing all of those complaints, I'm like, what is that? What does that mean? What is it that's going on in our practice that we're up against that are forcing some of us to do unethical practice at times? And so let's talk about that. And can we do some things to change our laws to support social workers? The other thing I want to draw to people's attention too is that there are lots of social workers, including Angie and Kate, who are at the Board of Social Work. And so the more time I spend there, the more I realize that, it's not this separate group of folks, but for the most part, the board is social workers thinking and working on behalf of social workers. And so of the 12 and a half staff or so, you have 3 social workers on your staff that are licensed. There are 10 licensed social workers on the board. And I ask all of you out there, we will continue to spread the word as openings come up, but the board often is looking for new board members and they need social workers at all different levels to fill those spots. And so we need social workers across the state to step up into those roles and to speak on behalf. And they're the ones who then set the fee increases under whatever not to exceed exists at that time and gets to make those decisions.
Yeah, it's the governance body.
Yeah, so the governance for the board is 10 licensed social workers and 5 public members currently. So lots of social workers' voices at that table also. So in terms of what will happen next in this process, we have 1 minute left. Just so people are aware, if you're sitting there and you're dying to ask a question, we will stick around for probably 10 minutes or so and answer some questions, but I'm going to close in just a minute or two here, and then we'll turn it over. So if you want to stick around and listen to Q&A, or you can listen to the recording later also. So in terms of next steps and what will happen in the process, as I said, NASW is going to send a survey to our members tomorrow for their feedback on how they'd like NASW to proceed in responding to the bills that are currently on the table. The House file currently is 2184, and the author is Liebling, and the Senate file is 2302, which is the omnibus Health and Human Service Budget Bill with the author Marty. It's in Article 11 of each of those bills, Section 16. So as Kate said, they're over 600 pages long, and so finding it can be a little tricky. So I'm hoping that those numbers will help you folks. If you want to follow this over the course of time, you can go onto the legislative website and follow those bills. The House file is being heard this Thursday in the House. The Senate file doesn't have a hearing yet at this point. There are pros and cons to fighting this and not fighting this, as you've heard today. As much as I believe that our members and social workers across the state would not like to see their fees increase by 40% or more, I absolutely am on that boat. I'm not thrilled with paying more every time I have to re-up my license. I think that my understanding from your conversation today and the conversations we've had, the materials that you've put together, the numbers that you've put together, I think we can all be pretty clear that there is a necessity at this point to raise fees. Whether or not we all agree that the line that you've set right now with that not to exceed at over 40% makes sense or feels good to social workers, that will be, up for conversation with folks. But I believe that, in the end, we're all going to work toward these same sort of shared goals, as I talked about at the beginning. And we'd hope to not have negative impacts on your staffing or other services that are provided, because social workers absolutely don't want to see even slower service or less service than what is being provided right now. And
Exactly.
so we appreciate what you can do to help cut those wait times. And we also want to make sure that we aren't sort of making that process even more difficult along the way.
Right.
So with that said, I'd like to go ahead and open us up to some question and answer, and thank all of those of you who jump off at any time here for joining us today. NASW will continue to do more things like this, like our Protecting Democracy Forum, where we talked about voter engagement, and our elected officials and those we were thinking about electing back in the fall. We'll do things like this, more issue-based forums, either in webinar style or in person, where people can also join us through a streaming option across the state. But it is our goal to bring as much policy-related content to our members in timely ways, and in ways that you can hear us and see us, and everyone can be a part of it as well. So thanks so much for joining us today. So if you have questions, if you want to go ahead and jump in the chat. Rob, have we had anyone yet?
No,
jump in
not
the
yet,
chat.
but I'm watching the chat here, and so your chat window should be on your screen. There's still about 48 people online, so feel free to ask a question.
I think as people are jumping into that, if we want to open it up to Angie and Rob, if you have any other comments or thoughts as we work through all of that discussion today.
Well, I just echo everything. Kate did a very good job at outlining the issues and what the reality is at the board. I'm really looking forward to hearing, what NASW members, what feedback we get. I know we were really cognizant of communication, and we've really done a lot to really, meet that. That expectation of more communication. So, and the gov delivery, if you haven't signed up.
I guess I would acknowledge that I've seen that. I've signed up.
Yeah.
I've gotten a couple just recently from you guys, and I've been able to read that information. And as folks ask, then I have more information I can share with them.
Right.
I think for me, the other big comments is I do want our community to be protected from folks who aren't doing what they should in practice. And I think that's an important role that the board plays. But I don't want those folks working in my profession, and I need to have a check and balance around that. Just professionally, I feel that makes sense. So I do appreciate the work that the board does. And then I think our well-prepared folks who are becoming social workers and working towards licensure, I do appreciate when their application process can move quickly, and we all do. We need social workers working in our communities, and so if you're well prepared to move through that process as a social worker, I appreciate being able to do that in a timely way, and I know our social workers do as well.
Yeah, and I would just excuse me, I'd maybe offer in closing, I am so grateful for this opportunity, and I really think that I can say that on behalf of all staff and the board, to be able to reach out, have the conversation, and really work in a nicely collaborative way with the professional associations. The board, we don't want this to be an adversarial kind of situation. And even though our missions are different, I really do come back to the commonalities. And I think that's where we can all find some of our similar strengths. And the commonalities are those shared goals, that we've got well-prepared social workers, that we are providing good and efficient customer service. And we ultimately want all the citizens of Minnesota and the recipients of social work services to be assured that they're going to have pretty sound services.
Absolutely. Are there any questions being posed now, Rob?
No questions in our chat yet. So if you can find your chat, if you want to ask a question, the chat module on your right-hand side of your computer. So I don't have any pending questions here.
If you click under the questions, is there anything there as well? You see that?
Check there.
You have to bring the mouse over the other direction. Sorry, Rob's on my computer, so yeah. It's up on the monitor right there.
There it is. Okay.
So there it is. Yeah. All right.
Pop over that question one more time, just where it says questions. Thought I saw something there. Didn't scroll up.
Here we go.
Kind of small.
Ah, that's where it is. Let's see if we can make these bigger. I figured there was no way there were no questions coming in. So bear with us here, folks. I don't know why we can't. Huh.
That little box, square box there. Bring it up.
Ta-da!
There we go. Okay.
Thank you. That's where people were chiming in.
All right.
Fantastic. I'm going to scroll down till we get to. All right. Why don't you cruise through there a little bit, Rob?
Right.
See what you can see.
The question here, simple question, but what does a September implementation mean if we're looking at September implementation?
Mm-hmm. And if I can take that one, which I think, again, is a very exciting option and suggestion to the board. And again, with that, that is the beauty of this not to exceed legislative bill, because it sets a cap, but it allows the board the opportunity to have time to do implementation. So I heard the suggestion being, don't put this into effect immediately July 1. And what would go into effect immediately July 1 are those full not to exceed amounts, which the board has no intention of establishing. And so the board really can take time to consider when to introduce a change with a higher actual fee amount. And this was something the board, we talked about last session. And I think that this sort of makes common sense. And I heard the board being somewhat open to this. And so, for example, those new higher actual fees might go into effect September 1, October 1. I mean, the board would have flexibility to not put those into effect immediately July 1.
And that would mean that people who were newly applying for licensure for the first time and those who are then renewing their license.
Correct.
Right. So someone who's just recently renewed their license will not feel the effects of any rate increase until the next time they renew their license.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
So that September 1 does not mean that we're all going to get a bill for the difference. So say we just paid, like I'm re-upping at the end of this month.
No.
So I won't, so if I pay my fees now in March, I won't pay the new fees until 2 years from now in March when I re-up my license. So I hope that clears up things for folks.
Correct.
Well, happy birthday.
Yeah, thanks.
No, because it's the birthday month.
That's right. Everyone comes to our ethics trainings in their birthday month too. So we have lots of birthdays to celebrate.
I'll batch two questions together here. They're good ones. What if the board does go into the red? What does that mean for social workers? And also, are there other licensed boards in the state, RNs, MDs, teachers, that are structured similarly, or are they supported through the general fund?
Oh, boy. Okay, so two things. If the board were to go into the red in that reserve, that is not a good place to be. The law provides up to 5 years to recover. And what would happen in that case is, quite frankly, we would be borrowing some funds from some of the other health licensing boards to be able to not be in the red and pay all of our bills. But clearly we would have to pay that back. Mm-hmm. And so, at the end of the day, that's, even though we would not have to turn off the lights and lock the doors, it's not a good business model to be in.
Would you have to lay off staff or cut expenses significantly?
I think that is very possible. Mm-hmm. I think that is very possible, because at the end of the day, if we don't have the operational funds and we don't have monies to bring up from the savings account, I mean, I've got to be able to make salaries and pay rent. Mm-hmm. So I think that is a real concern. The other question, how are the other boards structured? all of health licensing boards in Minnesota. There are 18 of us. We are independent health licensing boards, independent state agencies. We all follow the same model. The Board of Teaching, quite frankly, I'm not sure if they are all fee-based or if they do get general fund dollars. I'm not certain.
A question related to, this whole structure of how fees increase or don't. Why wouldn't it be tied to inflation?
Oh, well, and I guess how I would respond to that is that I think, quite frankly, it is tied to inflation. And by inflation, I guess my sort of interpretation of that now, I'm tying it more to a cost of doing business, which I think is the inflationary cost of needing to do business. I highlighted how a number of our core expenditures have gone up 100% in the last 4 to 5 years. So I think that is inflationary. And my point with that was, if you looked at what might be a more standard inflationary increase for businesses of 2%, at the end of the day, for us to get $25,000 additional dollars per year is not going to make a dent.
Sure. And last year, this was something that we brought to the legislators also when we were negotiating with them, and said, people would love to see a 2% increase more consistently over time, so that fees, every time you re-upped, they had gone up slightly, and then the board would have enough. And the legislators shut us down. They said that is not how we do licensure fees. Right. We have all of the health licensing boards. We want them to all sort of run under the same kind of framework. And so they were not open to hearing that option. They like to see, they kept coming back to, these not to exceeds, just allow the threshold to be set and the boards to set their fees within that. And then they'll renegotiate when that not to exceed is simply not enough because of inflation of costs and all those sorts of things. But they don't want to hear from us every year or two. They don't want the Board of Social Work spending their time and energy, or the legislature spending their time and energy on this every year over and over again, was kind of the sense I got from them.
Right. And, while the legislature clearly provides oversight, I don't really think that they want to micromanage the health licensing boards, because in the scheme of policy and state budget, there are other really big things to be paying attention to as well.
And they did say that as well. Yeah.
There's one last unique question here. So county workers are not currently required to be licensed due to a rule in our state. Can you speak to how this might impact the Board of Social Work in terms of your budget or your activities?
I welcome that question. What I would say to that is, first of all, the board has been very diligently trying to repeal the licensing exemptions from particular kinds of settings in Minnesota over the course of 30 years. We have been successful in repealing probably 4 or 5 exemptions. The last holdout is county agency social workers. The board is on record for wanting to appeal that exemption. We have tried 3 different times introducing legislation, 3 different times over the course of the last 20 years, ran into opposition, and it was defeated. Now, that's still on the agenda. I think the question is when and what kind of a political climate do we need to help ensure that will be successful. If, in fact, the board could be successful in removing the county exemption, when we moved forward the last time, it was in the year 2012, and we ran the data, because I think from a high level simplistic view, you say, ooh, that's more revenue, but then you have to recognize, ooh, that's more social workers to regulate. So even if you're getting more revenue, you will need to provide additional service. But when we ran the data, we thought that it could be as many as 2,500 new licensees coming under the board's oversight. And you bet that that's additional revenue. But again, we would have to provide more services. In the end of the day, we are not a for-profit business. We are supposed to collect the money that is required to produce our core services. So I'm not quite sure how that would play out, but it is certainly not going to be a whole bunch of extra money that we can put in the reserves. But at the end of the day, even the opportunity for revenue aside, I think more importantly, repealing that county exemption is what is very important for the general public in Minnesota, because this exemption interferes with the board being able to carry out its mission. It really creates a double standard of care for really some of the most vulnerable populations in our state. They're not afforded the same assurance for the qualifications of somebody who's licensed. They have absolutely no recourse to the board's independent complaint resolution process if something goes wrong. People contact us now and we sort of say, sorry, can't help you. That is not a good place for anyone to be. And in addition, even though, the board's mission is public protection, not advancement of the profession, it would absolutely be a benefit for the profession as well to have licensees serve in the public sector, in the counties. I mean, it is just one of those, I've from my from my altruistic perspective, I think it's a win-win-win across the board. Yeah. And the board will be talking about that again as we are doing our deep dive review of the Board's Practice Act.
Yeah.
So, I hope that I can say stay tuned for that one. And if the board would move forward, boy, that is a time when we need the support and the collaboration of the profession.
Yeah. And I would say too that it's absolutely the NASW's Minnesota stance on that is that we support elimination of the exemption.
Right.
That has been the stance for many years.
Right.
I think that when we think about social workers out in practice, we know from many research studies, and a recent one that I worked on, a team with the University of Minnesota recently, on a study asking Minnesotans what they think social workers do. Mm-hmm. The vast percentage of Minnesotans still think social workers mostly do child protection.
Right.
And the fact that it is those workers who are still exempt from licensure is beyond me. And I get calls from other social workers who are concerned. This happens often. I get calls from social workers in community agencies who are concerned about a social worker who's in the county working with a family, and what recourse do they have to complain about the service that this family's maybe not getting, or it's inappropriate actions or whatever by a county worker, and beyond calling into the county, who's really they need as a partner and that sort of thing too, puts them in a difficult spot.
Sure.
They don't have any recourse, just like the general public doesn't have recourse to call you if something's going on with a social worker in that realm. So I think that's important for us to pay attention to.
Absolutely.
And so there we are. Okay, did we have any final thoughts there, Rob? Any questions from people?
A lot of the questions were similar to the ones we just went through.
Okay.
Yep.
Things we've already covered?
Yep.
All right. So with that said, I thank you all for being here today. Thanks for everyone who hung out with us. Please pass the word that we'll go ahead and spread this out if people want to listen up later. And members, go ahead and look for that survey coming tomorrow. Have a great day, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And you can just hit the end button. Stop recording.